As a 13-year-old on a family holiday in Fiji, Australian boy Jay Whyte had no idea the tremendous impact he would one day have on the Fijian tourism industry and the lives of Fijian villagers. Jay owns and operates the multi-award-winning Sigatoka River Tours and is helping the economies of remote villages. My family and I went up the river with Jay's team when we were in Fiji, and it honestly was the highlight of our stay. I caught up with Jay recently, who shared his love of the Fijian people and their culture with me. Jay Whyte, thank you very, very much for joining me today. And I'm so interested in your story and the Sigatoka River Tours that you run. Tell me how it all started, because you went over as a child, didn't you?
That's right, yeah. So I was first able to visit Fiji back in 1991 on a family holiday, and not knowing it at the time that it was going to change my life. But stayed at the Shangri-La's Fijian resort back then. And on day 3, I met this security guard who was doing his rounds of the resort. And I noticed he was wearing a little pin on his shirt which said Bendigo, and my mum's from Bendigo, so it was sort of like an opening. And he just started telling me all these wonderful stories about his family, his village, and Fiji in general. And he's a great storyteller, and I was just captivated, and followed him all around the resort, went back of house, got to see things that most people don't see when they're staying there, and did the same thing again day 2. And then at the end of day 2, he said, I've got the day off work tomorrow. Would you like to come and see my village? So obviously after hearing all about it, the answer was pretty much yes, please. And when I spoke to Dad, and we organised to jump in a minivan the next morning, headed up into the interior, 2 hours up there, up to Rainbow Village, and we were welcomed in like long lost family that day. And I just fell in love with Fiji, and we went swimming in the river, horseback riding to the waterfall, and it was just a wonderful experience. Really, off the beaten track, and literally changed my life. I just had a new appreciation for small things, and when you looked at our life in Australia compared to what their life was in the village, they were giving us so much without asking for anything in return, and it just taught me, the basic humility of humanity. That the less they had, but the more they gave, was incredible. So I just thought, this is me. I wanted to come back to Fiji as much as I could, and every 2 years kept coming back and visiting. And the village has sort of seen me grow up from a 13-year-old kid to an adult, and I'd stay longer and longer each time I visited. In 1991, later that same year, we went to New Zealand, and I did a jet boat ride, and that was where the two ideas really came together. So it's a case of the universe pointing me in the right direction, and I just followed.
It's amazing how your friend just wearing that Bendigo pin, and how that all started something fantastic. And I'm interested to know that next few times you went, did you go with your family, or did you just go on alone over there?
So I was very fortunate that my father at the time was working for Coca-Cola, and they had operations obviously here in Fiji, so he had to come to Fiji quite regularly. And so whenever I heard he was coming, I was asking to tag along. So the second trip in 1993 was actually just me and my dad, and that there's 2 trips in 93, but the first one in January was just after Cyclone Kina. And so we went up to the village and took some clothes, at the time, Coca-Cola had a promotion called Future Ball. So we took about 20 Future Ball shirts and gave them to the villagers, and they became the red team, and they loved it. And then later that year, we did a family trip in 93 back to Fiji, because everyone, not only myself, but everyone fell in love with Fiji. So there's a strong family connection. And then 95, we did it again. And then 98, I traveled solo and spent time by myself here in Fiji. And obviously the aim was always to try and live and work in Fiji. And I made it come true, made it real back in 2005.
All right. So you moved over there in 2005. And did you have a plan in place of what you're going to do?
So the truth of the story about the safari was that at 13 years old, my initial idea was when I was sitting on the jet boat in New Zealand, I said, this would be brilliant to bring the villagers down the river to do their shopping rather than having to go up that bumpy road to get to, and I said, so at 13, that's the way I thought. Bring the villagers down the jet boat, take them back up. And anyway, that sort of idea disappeared into my mind at 13 years old. And then when I was, 2003, at 25 years old, I was thinking, what am I going to do with my life? Sitting in traffic in Sydney. And all of a sudden, this original idea of bringing the villagers down jumped into my brain. And within half an hour, it turned into basically what the Sigatoka River Safari is now. How about we take people upriver to experience the Fijian culture? And the next day went out and bought a book on how to write a business plan, started in making inquiries with boat builders in New Zealand. And I didn't know it at the time, but the person I contacted was the pioneer of this sort of thing in New Zealand. So again, the universe was pointing me in the right direction, and I contacted him by email, asked how much to build a boat. He gave me a price. I said, yeah, that sounds fair enough. And then another email, and he came back with more information. And to eventually, when it started to get a bit more serious, he called me up and he said, yeah, it's Neil Ross here. Just sounds like you're getting serious. You got some funny rules over there in Australia about jet boating. And I said, oh, stop. It's for Fiji. He says, oh, that changes everything. So organised to fly him over to Fiji in 2004. We surveyed the river, went all the way up to what I call my village, Bramba, and we sat there drinking kava, and he was just sort of amazed by what he saw. And he just told me, this will be the best jet boat tour in the world. Just give it time. So it's incredible how it's all happened. And he's my mentor. I didn't know it when I first met him, but when we went to New Zealand to do our driver training, he started sharing his story about what he did in 1988, starting Dart River Safari. And it's incredible what he achieved. And, I was amazed at the knowledge and experience that he had. And it's just been a wonderful journey with him since that time.
That's amazing. So Jay, how difficult is it to start a business up in Fiji like you, especially, where there's public involved? And
yeah. So when I first made the jump to move to Fiji, I came over in August 2005, and obviously all I knew is that we put a deposit on a boat to be built in New Zealand, and I had to lay the groundwork. I did a lot of legwork in 2004 and early part of 2005 before moving full time, but I went and saw my friend Peter, who was actually now living in Australia, and shared the idea. He's on board as a partner in the business. And once he heard the idea about basically giving people a chance that he gave me, he was very much supportive, and he told me who to go and see in the village. And they became my spokesman as I traveled down along the Sigatoka River, visiting the chiefly houses. So I did everything the traditional way first, before I did the bureaucratical side with the government second. And that's really shown the due respect to the Fijian culture and the people. And that's really proven to be beneficial, because it's in time, when little things have popped up, because by doing the right thing in the first instance, those small problems have sort of dissipated. So when I came back, did a lot of the connecting the dots, I guess you could say. And then when we did our driver training in January or February of 2006, and we had our official launch in March 9, 2006. That's just over 17 years now. We had the paramount chief of the province came to be our special guest to officially launch the business. We brought down the main chiefs on the day on the boat. So they had a boat ride down the river, and the very next day, we went back up to Rainbow Village as a family with Peter, about the halfway mark up the river. Peter, who grew up in Fiji, but he'd never been along the river like this. He had tears coming down his cheeks, and he was just thinking of his father telling the stories about how they used to have to travel down the river on bamboo raft, and now he's going up in a motorized boat and just seeing it from a totally different perspective. So it was quite emotional. He and I call each other Wulewe, which means my brother. And that was the name of the first boat. That's the number plate I have on my car here. So there's lots of symbolic things that have happened over that time as well. So yeah, it's been a wonderful journey.
It's interesting that Peter moved to Australia and you moved to Fiji.
Yeah, we traded. We did one in, one out.
So, Jay, tell me what village life is like, because as you know, we were in Fiji and I met you, and we went on one of your tours, which we just absolutely loved. It was honestly the highlight of our trip. So we had a first-hand view of what Fijian village life is like. So could you just describe it for?
I guess from my perspective, a Fijian village is built around a hierarchy. You've got and there's obviously Fijians have lived in the islands for 3,000 years. So in many ways, they've worked out what works and adopted it. So everyone's got a function or a role in a traditional Fijian village setting. You've got the chiefly family, you've got their spokesman, you've got their fishermen, you've got their builders, you've got the priests. So everyone knows their role, so to speak. But at the end of the day, if you sort of summarize a Fijian village, it's really built on sharing, loving, and caring. They don't close their doors. The door's always open. They freely move around, going from house to house. Their neighbours, as you'd call in Australia, the neighbour's house is the family house. So everyone cares for everyone. That's why the old saying is, it takes a village to raise a child. As I mentioned, our first trip, you sort of look from a materialistic perspective. They might not have much, but they're richer than most people I know living in Australia, because their spirit and what they place true value in is greater. And it's really built on family, friends, and faith. They're the main components. And they're just so generous of self, of spirit, and they welcome in. Like, people ask me about tourism in Fiji, and I said it's almost like a match made in heaven, because Fijians are just so genuinely hospitable. It's not an act, it's who they are. I remember when I sort of started the business and they asked me, what did they want them to do? What am I asking them to do? And I said, just be yourself. Like, that's all it is just let people, be yourself, and just do what Peter's family did for me when I visited 91.
It's a wonderful opportunity for people like us to go and see how, the Fijian villagers live. And they were just so gracious and so generous, and they are just really the most beautiful people. Nothing was too much trouble, and they welcomed us with open arms, and cooked a huge feast for us. It was incredible.
Yeah, they're very special people.
Yeah. One of the interesting things that I think it was the bus driver that took us from Sigatoka out to where we hopped on the jet boat, but he was telling us that in the villages, if a family had 3 girls and they want a boy, and their cousin has had 3 boys, or they'll swap children around. So can you tell me a bit about that? That's incredible.
Yeah, that's not an uncommon thing, where even if some families don't have children, they'll ask their sister or brother, or even their cousin, that if they're having another child, can we please adopt that child? And because of the family structure in Fiji, like in the Western world in Australia, you've got your mum, dad, children, and that's sort of the nuclear family. Whereas in Fiji, you've got your cousins, they call cousin brother. That's how close the relationship is. It's not a distant thing. It's so close that they're considered a brother as opposed to a cousin, if you know what I mean. And they'll call their uncle, so their father's brother will be their small father. So that's their uncle, but it's the small father or the big father, I remember my friend Peter calling my mum, because that's how they view it. It's like the dynamics, or the view of a family is greater than how we see it, Yes, they might adopt a child from their cousin or their sister or brother. That child will still grow up knowing who their biological parents are and still have a close relationship. But it's just a true embracing of the family in a greater sense,
Mm-hmm. And Jane, the other thing that we found interesting was, and which we all thought was really great, is that alcohol is banned in those villages. So tell me where that has come from, or how the young people deal with that. Are they okay with it, or I guess they don't know any different?
Yeah, no, like at the end of the day, humans are the same all around the world, but in Fijian village settings, they do have their own bylaws, which are obviously monitored and maintained by, they can call in the police if anyone breaks the bylaws, and they're set by the provincial council. And so for the most part, people respect that. If they want to consume alcohol, they'll do it outside of the village boundaries. And yeah, again, Fijian culture, like most indigenous cultures, are built on respect. And in the old days, if anyone did anything that was considered wrong, they'd have the weekly meeting in the village hall, and it's almost like a little court setting where they'd call people up and read out the charges. You've done the wrong thing, you've done this X, Y, and Z, and they determine what their punishment was. And in the old days, it was a case of maybe a public flogging sort of thing in front of the entire village. And once the punishment's been handed out, then they're embraced back into the village. So that really helped in terms of the behaviour of the old days. Obviously, over time, those elements have sort of changed somewhat, but there's some things we can learn from the old days, I think.
Oh, absolutely. And Jay, your venture has brought so much to the Fijian villages that you support. So tell me how things have changed.
The best way I can sort of explain that is that prior to the tour starting, if the village had a function, like be it a wedding, a funeral, or any other major event that would come along, they'd have to ask everyone in the village what they call a soli to give towards that event or that function. So since our beginning of tours, what we've noticed is that the asking from the individual houses to cover these costs for the obligations is sort of stopped. So a lot of the households now get to retain their money without having to contribute individually, and the money from the tour is helping cover those aspects. A lot of the villages also have done various projects which have included footpaths in the village, electrification. We've had a lot of generous people that have come on the tour who also donated for things like that as well, finishing off churches, building kindergartens, and it's just been incredible, the flow-on benefits, even through to school scholarships. And we've even had dogs who have gone overseas that we've had guests see a village dog and want to give them a new life, and one's gone to Australia and one's gone to USA. So it's amazing with the flow-on benefits, not only to the humans but also to the canines.
It's actually funny that you mentioned the animals, because I've just interviewed a lady from Brisbane who visited Fiji, and she's ended up bringing a kitten back to Australia. And so, and Jay, on top of all that, you've won so many awards, haven't you? So you've really done such a great thing, not only for the Fijian villages, but also tourism as a whole.
Yeah, thank you. It's, like when we started out I guess the journey in 2006, you didn't know where it was going to go, but thankfully, people like yourself, hearing what you say really means a lot, because it's sort of how we felt that first time when we went. And it's just wonderful to hear people have that connection and that love for Fiji and the experience that they had in the interior, because for so long, a lot of people never even realized that Fiji had an interior. They always associated the islands, the coastline, and that was Fiji. But it's, I had a comment from someone up in the interior a few years ago where he made the comment, Jay, thank you, you've civilized us. But what he actually meant by saying that was, I think he meant, thank you for allowing people to see us, like to come and visit us in the interior. Obviously, for a lot of them, English is not the first language, so you've got to sometimes interpret the meaning of what they're saying. So when he said that, I took it to mean, thank you for letting people see us. up here in the interior, because for so long they've been sort of looked down on. People use the term kaivolo, which means mountain person, but they use it in many ways in a derogatory sense. That when people don't sort of understand things the way they are in the Western or the modern world, I see it more as a reference to culture shock. They say someone's kaivolo if they don't get it or they don't understand it. So that was to me, I took it as a really big compliment. They appreciate us opening the world to them, if you know what I mean. I take great pride in the fact that we work with 18 different villages, trying to share the benefits of tourism without relying solely on tourism. That we visit each village for 4 months of the year, just one day of the week. And then for the rest of the time, they're still having to live their traditional life. So it really is a balancing act. And I think the fact that we've picked up some of these awards is just a reflection of where the genesis of the business started from and the real reason behind it. I just really appreciate that people understand it and they get it.
Well, Jay, on my next trip, we're going to do the off-road cave safari, which is one of yours as well. And I've read a lot about it, but we just ran out of time. But Jay, thank you so much for sharing this story. I just loved hearing about it, and especially all the little things that came together, the universe coming together with the Bendigo badge and winter, and just how everything works out in the end. There's a grander plan.
That's right. Thank you so much, and I really appreciate you having interest and obviously, of course, coming on the tour. So thank you so much.
It was our pleasure. Banaka.
Banaka. Hope to see you soon.
Thank you, Jay. Thank you for watching and listening to my interview. If you'd like to hear more inspiring stories, subscribe to my YouTube channel or my podcast and follow me on Instagram and Facebook at Life Journey TV.